Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rebecca Johnson, one of the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County. Would everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And if everyone would, before we go any further, please take a moment and be sure that your cell phones are off. If you have to take a call, we would ask that you leave the chambers before answering them. The voter forms are presented by the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County. The city has provided the facilities, and the form is being telecast live by BTV 10. Forums will be repeated on BTV 10 and the city's YouTube channel and on low-powered radio stations KMRE and KAVZ. And the Bellingham Herald is our media partner. We want to thank all of these partners for their generous support, and if you have the opportunity, we hope you will also thank them as well. The forums are the property of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham, and may not be used in any manner without specific written permission from both parties. Founded in 1920, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization with 800 affiliates across the country. The League encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Membership is open to both men and women, and we hope you will all join us. Our league has produced 3 election forums this year. You can watch this forum again and repeats of the first 2 forums if you've missed them on City of Bellingham station BTV 10, Comcast Channel 10, or you can watch it on demand. You go to youtube.com and search City of Bellingham. This morning, we will hear the final of the 3 forums produced by the League for the general election this year. We are covering 6 of the 10 charter amendment propositions that will be on all Whatcom County voters' ballots. Ballots are going to be mailed Wednesday, October 14th. If you would like to submit a question for any of today's sessions, please signal the usher to collect your card. There's little index cards that should write on. The League of Women Voters of Bellingham Whatcom County has consulted with the Public Disclosure Commission regarding rules related to political issues debates held in public facilities. We've determined that these debates are being held in compliance with all regulations. Now I'd like to introduce our Voter Services Chair, Tanya Blomgart.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good morning, everyone. The Whatcom County Charter is, in effect, our county constitution. With voter approval, it became effective in 1978. Since then, voters have elected 4 charter review commissions, 1 each decade, to see how well it continues to serve the best interests of our county residents. 10 propositions to change the charter will be on the November 3rd ballot. 8 were approved by a majority of the review commission and 2 by the county council. Almost all concern how county council elections are placed on the ballot or how voters choose those candidates. 1 is about how long a council member or the county executive can serve in office. We will be starting with Proposition 1, which concerns our method of electing county council members. To aid better understanding, there are 2 types of election methods that are part of this conversation: district-only voting and countywide voting. In a district-only voting system, voters vote only for the county council candidates who live in the same district that they do. In a countywide voting system, voters vote for all of the races for county council, regardless of their district of residence. In our current system, we use district-only voting to nominate our top 2 candidates from our districts in the primary election. And then we use countywide voting to determine the overall winner in the general election. The at-large seat is determined by countywide vote. This proposition would change our system to using district-only voting in both the primary and the general election. And so voters would cast ballots only for those candidates that live in their district, except for the at-large seat, which would still be determined by countywide vote. This proposition, currently our county has 3 districts. Each district has 2 seats, which come up for re-election on an alternating basis. And then we have 1 at-large seat. So you can please see the handout that was given to you. It has a graphic of our county districts. This handout is also available on our league website. That's at www.lwvbellinghamwhatcom.org. Those are for our audience at home. We have 2 speakers this morning to share the pros and cons of changing our current election method for council members. Carl Upiano, chair of DOVE Whatcom, which stands for District-Oriented Voting is for Everybody, will speak for Proposition 1, and Rudd Brown, who is currently a Whatcom County Council member, but is speaking today as an individual and not on behalf of the County Council. He will speak against Proposition 1. Thank you both for being here. Before we begin, the rules of the forum are: speakers will have 1.5 minutes for their opening statements and 1 minute each to rebut their opponent's comments. After the rebuttals, they will have 1 minute to respond to questions and for their closing statements. We will rotate which speaker responds to questions first. Riley Abel will be tracking the time, and Carol Como is our sign wizard. She flashes yellow for 15 seconds and red for stop. If you don't stop talking, a bell will be rung. And that means cut it out right now or we're getting the hook. We ask that the speakers are respectful of the time allotted due to the limited amount of time that we have. An important goal of the League is civil discussion. To that end, we also ask that the members of the audience be respectful and refrain from comments, as well as hold your applause to the end of each segment. Some questions have been provided by Bellingham Herald reporters and a League question committee. Written questions from the audience are desired, so please send them on down. There are ushers available. Ushers, can you raise your hand? They have cards, they can bring them to you, and then they signal them and they'll bring them down here for our question screeners. Today, our questions are being screened by League members Joe Collins, John Turnbaugh, and Judith Wiseman. They're screening for legibility, clarity, and duplication. Now, speakers, please remember that your opening statement should answer the question: what is your most compelling argument for why voters should support or not support Proposition 1? When we do our pro and con statements, we always start with the pro first. So, Mr. Upiano, we will start with you. You now have 1.5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Carl Upiano, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having this forum. Last year, I ran for a seat on the Charter Review Commission from the 3rd District. I didn't win. I missed it by that much. I learned a lot about campaigning, though, and how much work it is to cover my district. I try to imagine how much work it would be to cover the entire county effectively. And I learned a great deal about my district that I would not have known if I had to cover the entire county. I spent less than $5,000, about half of it my own money. And in fact, none of the nearly 30 Charter Review candidates spent more than $5,000 on their campaigns. We all filed for mini reporting with the Public Disclosure Commission. And it's a case study in district-oriented voting, of which I am the proponent in this debate. The Charter Review Commission had a conservative majority this year, but in years past, the composition was different. There is really no partisan lock either way. District-oriented voting should not be a partisan issue. It takes 2/3 less time, money, and effort to campaign in one district. It lowers the barriers to entry, making it possible for a more diverse slate of candidates to apply. It can reduce the amount of outside money flowing into our council races. I think district-oriented voting would be a good thing for Whatcom County.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Proposition 1, I believe, is intentionally misleading. When district-only voting was put on the ballot in 2005, voters were asked if they wanted to elect council members from their own district. But what voters were not told is that if they did so, it would cost them the right to elect the rest of the council. Our citizens soon realised that what they had lost. So in 2008, it went back on the ballot. Armed with a voter's guide, our citizens decided to reclaim their right to vote county-wide for all 7 of their council members. Since then, a small but very partisan group has been misleading voters, claiming that district-only voting was taken from you by the council. Nothing was taken from anybody. A majority of the voters simply voted to put go back to county-wide elections. This year, the group has put district-only back on the ballot, and again they will fail to disclose that if it passes, citizens will again lose the right to vote for 4 of their 7 council members. The reasons for 2 and 3 are even more misleading. The small partisan group knows that if district-only passes, people will later realise it's a mistake. But this time, as their blog states, they hope to lock in district-only voting with Propositions 2 and 3, because the true purpose of Propositions 2 and 3 is to forever take away your right to petition the council to put anything on the ballot that would threaten their view of how elections are held. Please vote no for Propositions 1, 2 and 3.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, would you like to rebut Mr. Upiano's comments?
So as I listened to Carl's comments, the principal argument appears to be that it's too difficult or too expensive to run county-wide. I'm in the at-large position, so no matter what happens in the outcome of this election, I will be running county-wide, or whoever goes after my position will be running county-wide. And I think that's good for the citizens. First off, it's not that much work. It does take dedication, but that's what you want out of your elected officials. It does take a willingness to listen to all the views on the county, and that's what you want out of your elected officials. I think the argument that we need to go to district only so we can constrict what our council members have to focus on, we constrict on the geographic boundaries that they represent, I think it's just a bad policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano, would you like to rebut Mr. Brown's comments?
Well, I think the idea that that district-oriented voting would take something from people is a bit misleading itself. Part of the problem is that when you vote for the entire county council, you actually dilute your vote, and there are actually lawsuits and concerns about minority representation having to do with that. When you vote for people from your own district, you get to elect your county representative once every 2 years. You alternate county representatives, and that actually gives you the ability to vote for people in your area that understand your needs, concerns, and preferences. And so that's the reason why I think that it's better to have a district-oriented system. When you vote for the entire county council, you're voting for representatives from other districts.
Thank you. So we're going to start with our questions. The first question is, would the democratic process be better served by district-only or county-wide election of county council members? And what's the reason for your opinion? And that's the democratic process, whether it will be better served. We will start with you, Mr. Upiano.
Well, I think the democratic process would be better served, although I guess the question would be, some people are concerned that district-oriented voting would prevent them from being able to vote for every council member, whereas other people are concerned that are bothered by the fact that somebody from another district would be electing their representatives. The fact is that in this country, most legislatures are elected by district, and that's the understood pattern.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Brown?
So I'll start with Mr. Upiano's last comment. One of the examples that was used in the voter's guide that's being put out by representatives of district-only voting was that it's like having a representative from Oregon having a voice in, having voters in Oregon having a voice in the election of people in Washington State. And I think that's also another example of this being misleading, because the fundamental difference is someone in Oregon is not being taxed by someone in Washington State, whereas if you're in District 1, 2 or 3, you are being taxed by the decisions made by the council members in all districts. So if you have district-only voting, you'll end up with a form of taxation without equal representation.
All right, thank you. Our next question is, what problem is this proposal designed to solve? Can you present evidence from past elections to support or refute the assertion that district-only voting is a better solution to that problem than countywide voting? And we will start with Mr. Brown.
So I actually can't support that district-only voting is better than countywide voting. But what I can do is give you an example of, I think, how evenly balanced the current system we have is. I'm in the at-large position. That at-large position has been voted countywide for I think probably the last 40 years, including the period that we had district-only before. During the last 4 cycles, that position, the position I now hold, has flipped back and forth between progressives and conservatives evenly. In 2000, it was held by a conservative. 4 years later, it was held by a progressive. 4 years after that, it was held by a conservative, and then 4 years after that, I picked up the position. That, to me, is a demonstration that the current system is very evenly balanced and achieves the goal of having voters being able to be responsive and to be fickle as to who they want in power.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano.
Well, as in my opening arguments, I don't believe this should be a partisan issue, and I certainly hope that this would not be considered to be a power grab by either side. The problem that we're trying to solve here is really to get more diversity on the county councils and lower the barriers to entry for people that would otherwise not want to take on the demands of a county-wide election. And as I say, the Charter Review Commission is sort of a case study in that, and I believe that that's the best indicator we have at the moment in terms of evidence. We've never run the county council elections long enough to be able to tell what the difference would be. We aborted that within a few years of it first being attempted, and we didn't give it a full try.
Okay, thank you. The next question. Proponents say that this proposal promotes more responsive and responsible county government. If you agree, how does district-only voting achieve this? If you disagree, why doesn't it? And we will start with you, Mr. Upiano.
Well, I believe it does achieve that, or would if we tried it, and for the reasons that I've already given. Basically, the lowering the barrier to entry, making campaigning per district more accessible, and I can give an example of my own experience running in 3rd District. I found out a great deal of things about the 3rd District that I had not been aware of prior to that experience. And if I had to cover the whole county, I may not have been able to cover those more detailed issues.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown?
So I think that this is perhaps one of the defining differences between our perspectives. Carl has just said this is about lowering the barriers of entry for people who don't want to take on the demands of countywide representation or countywide campaigning, but that translates into countywide representation. The challenge that you have is that most of the county budget is spent on things that cover the entire county. It's like the criminal justice system, it's the health department, it's a range of stuff. Probably only about 25% of the budget is spent on local issues. The challenge you have is that you end up with district-only voting, you will definitely end up with people who say, I represent District X, I'm not interested in what your issues are. When I ran for election, one of the challenges was that we had forums like this all around the county. My opponent refused to turn up to the one in Point Roberts, and when I asked the people there whether they'd seen him during the 4 years he was there, they said, we've never seen him. It's really frustrating.
All right, thank you. The next question. Opponents of this proposal argue that countywide voting promotes compromise among divergent points of view and makes council members more responsive to the needs of the county as a whole. Do you agree or disagree with this? And what are your reasons? We will start with you, Mr. Brown.
Well, I don't agree that it makes your elected representatives more accountable and more responsive, because of the very aspect. If a person is only willing to run if they're limited to only having to campaign in one district, I guarantee you they'll only represent the people in that one district. They will not come around to, if they're based in Bellingham, I'm not sure you're going to see them in Maple Falls. If they're based in Maple Falls, I'm not sure you're going to see them in Bellingham. So.
All right, thank you. I think maybe I misunderstood your answer, but this is the opponents of this proposal argue that countywide voting promotes compromise among divergent points of view and makes council members more responsive to the needs of the county as a whole. So are you saying that countywide doesn't do that? Because that's
I'm
what
sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Okay.
So I think countywide does make people more responsive, because first off, you have to listen to everybody throughout the whole community. And then you have to work alongside each of the council members, because each of the council members is tasked with solving problems for the entire community.
Okay. And we'll give you a little extra time on that one, Carl, if you have a minute and a half for a response to that one.
So I don't really believe that countywide representation is necessarily would necessarily foster better cooperation between the council members. And I look at the federal representation, which is from states or districts, and when they get to the federal level, they represent their local constituencies, but they also work together on committees, and they have experts in various areas that cross the aisle and cross disciplines. And I think that, you know, if the county council is designed to represent, you know, two representatives per district, but they can't work together on other things, or they can't come together on issues that are cross-cutting the districts and the county, then I think we have a dysfunctional problem, and maybe that needs to be addressed. I don't believe that district-oriented voting would cause rifts in the representation. If a person were to call up somebody from a different district, I would expect them to respond and say, well, you know, in some cases it is something they want to discuss, and in other cases it's something that may be better handled by somebody in their district, but I don't think they should be blown off.
All right, thank you. The next question. Will district-only voting lead to minority rule? And we will start with you, Mr. Upiano.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Will district-only voting lead to minority rule?
I would hope not. I think in some cases there would be people who argue that we already have minority rule in this present configuration. However, one of the fundamental principles of the founding of this country is that we're a representative republic, and one of the purposes of having representation is to prevent the tyranny of the majority, which is a problem that happens where minorities get run over and their concerns aren't heard. So I would hope that we would be able to represent minorities more effectively, but I would not want to think that minority rule would rule the day.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown.
So I think that this will definitely result in unequal representation. You are going to end up with a control from a minority. I just want to come back to one of the points that Mr. Urbano just made. He gives the federal government as an example of district-only working and the cooperative function within the elected officials, and I don't think it works in the congressional level. In fact, if you go to any member of Congress, there's 8 members of Congress in Washington State, if you go to 6 of those websites, they will tell you they will not take an inquiry online from anybody who's not in their district.
All right, thank you. The next question. There's been a good deal of speculation about which political viewpoint would win or lose majority control of the county council depending on which ballot issues succeed in this election. Is calculating winners and losers a compelling reason to amend the basic governing document of the county? And we will start with you, Mr. Brown.
No, I don't. To me, this is not an issue about ensuring that one party or the other is in power or not in power. One faction or one political view is in power or not in power. I'm passionate about the principles of democracy, and I want to see a system that is constantly responsive to the change of what the voters want and what the quality of the electeds that come forward. Again, I use as my earlier example, if you look at the last 16 years of what's happened in this county, with district only and with county-wide voting and district only voting, the dominance in the council has switched from one side to another. The at-large position, which to me is the most unbiased barometer of county-wide opinion, has flipped from one side to the other. And I think what happens with district only voting is that you will lock in minority control and then you'll prevent it from ever being changed again.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano?
I don't really understand how district-oriented voting would lock in minority control. I find that to be, I would have to see that demonstrated somehow and explained to me. I've been, in my opening remarks and in any time that I've ever discussed this, I've said that I don't think this should be a partisan issue, and I'm kind of disappointed that it has become one. The left have lined up against this, and the right have lined up behind it. And I think that if they think that there's going to be any kind of a lock-in one way or the other, that they're going to be disappointed.
Thank you. All right, next question. If the goal is more diverse voices, wouldn't Proposition 9, 5 fair and equal districts be a better solution? And let's see, we'll start with you, Mr. Upiano.
You know, when I first heard this presented to the Charter Review Commission, I was intrigued by the plan, and I think it intrigued many of the Charter Review Commissioners as well, and they did discuss it. But one of the problems was that they asked for more information and some more details and specifications on how this would happen, and it was never fully forthcoming. And so I think the concern that I have about this would be that we need more definition before we vote on it, before it goes to the voters in this election. I would like to see that postponed and further refined before we consider that.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
So I think this brings us back to 2 and 3. District-only voting, when combined with 2 and 3, which was the plan, eliminates any opportunity for the citizens to petition their council to put anything else on the ballot. One of the challenges is not only does this stop you from ever going back to county-wide if district only passes, and again you realise it's a problem, it also stops things like the 5-district proposal being put on. So I think if there's any criticism of this being rushed to put the 5-district on this election cycle, the reason is because if propositions 2 and 3 pass, we're done. We can't change it anymore.
Thank you. The next question. Isn't the real purpose of district-only voting to dilute the impact of Bellingham voters? And we will start with you, Mr. Brown.
I believe it is intended to dilute the impact of Bellingham voters and to ensure that there is an opportunity for a small but partisan group to gain a lot more influence than they're entitled to by their percentage of representation within the community.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano?
Well, I think I would have to categorically disagree with that. I don't think that the district-oriented voting would dilute Bellingham. I think it would bring more diversity to the council, and if Bellingham is now dominant representation on the council, then there may be an effect that appears to be dilution, but I think we need to be sure that everyone is equally represented throughout the county. So I would say that I would disagree with that statement.
All right, thank you. The next question. Repeatedly, the Review Commission heard from people who live outside Whatcom County's 7 cities that they lack representation on the council. Does district-only voting improve representation for rural residents? If so, how? If not, why not?
Is that for me?
I'm sorry, Mr. Upiano.
I believe it would improve representation for everyone in terms of the potentially increased diversity of the county council representation. And as I say, one of the things that the representation by district can potentially do is improve representation for the minorities.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Brown.
So I just want to come back and clear up a misconception that Bellingham dominates the council. Only 3 of your current council members live within the city limits of Bellingham. 4 of them live outside the city limits. 1 of them in Lyndon, 1 of them in the North Shore of Lake Whatcom, 1 of them in Ferndale, and I think 1 of them in the unincorporated areas outside of Ferndale. So the idea that somehow we need to put this in place to limit or restrict the representation of Bellingham is, I don't know what the plan is. Is it to eliminate any representation at all in Bellingham?
Okay, thank you. The next question. Currently, the population of Bellingham is divided among all 3 districts. Under present districting, what reason would a Bellingham voter have for choosing district-only voting for county council? And we'll start with you, Mr. Brown.
I can't think of any reason a Bellingham voter would choose district-only voting for county council. I think what you'll see is a further shift to an unequal basis. The reality is, by the way, one of the proposals that was also put forward by the Charter Review Commission was to make one of the seats a seat that no one in an urban area could vote for. They wanted that to be exclusively a an unincorporated part of the county representation. If that had happened, then you would have had both a constitutional problem, because that's in breach of the US and state constitutions, and you would have had definitely unequal representation, because the urban areas pay a disproportionate amount of the taxes to the rural areas.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano.
Well, in response, I would say that proposals that came up on the Charter Review Commission that got voted down are no longer in play, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. And some of the things that came up were rather off the wall. That's normal for people bringing up all ideas. But as for Bellingham voting for district-oriented voting or not, I don't think that should not disenfranchise. District-oriented voting should not disenfranchise Bellingham. As I keep saying, I believe that will increase the diversity on the council, and it will improve the situation that I believe that rural voters are concerned about, that they are not being well represented in terms of their things like property rights, private wells, farming, and so on.
Thank you. All right. I think we have time for one more question, and that question would be, would district-only voting encourage greater participation of both candidates and citizens in the electoral process? Why or why not? And we will start with you, Mr. Upiano.
I think, as I've said in my several times now, I guess, I think district-oriented voting would increase the participation both of candidates and potentially of the voters, because they would be more familiar with the people that they'd be voting for, and I believe there would probably be more candidates interested in running, wanting to by lowering the barriers to entry. It's not that people don't want to work hard to win, but they may have limited resources and time, and they just wouldn't take that step.
Thank you. And Mr. Brown.
So I think most people, first of all, I definitely believe it will discourage participation on the part of the electeds or the candidates. I mean, obviously, if you're in a district-only voting system, you're only going to have to canvass 1/3 of the community as you're running for election. You're also only going to have to respond to 1/3 of the community once you're elected. This job, it takes, realistically, it's billed as a part-time job. Most people look at it and say, oh, it's maybe 1 day a week. Well, it's 25, 30 hours a week if you want to do it properly. It's 25, 30 hours a week of driving around the community, talking to people from everywhere, from New Halem to Point Roberts, from Lummi Island to Glacier. And if you're going to do this job, you need to do it on the basis that you're serving the entire community, not just your local district.
Thank you. And it is now time for our closing statements. You'll have 1 minute, and we start with the pro side. So, Mr. Upiano, we start with you.
Thank you. Well, one thing I do need to address, I wasn't prepared to talk about Propositions 2 and 3 today, but I wanted to say that they are very narrowly focused on preventing, by requiring the council to have a unanimous vote to change the way they themselves are elected, or to make proposals of how they, whether they override voter amendments that were passed previously by a large majority. I didn't state that very well, but that's what they do. They don't prevent private citizens from petitioning for amendments. They don't change the way the Charter Review Commission proposes amendments, and they don't even change the way council proposes most other amendments, just those two specific ones, proposing amendments to override voter amendments that were voted on by a large majority, or by the changing the way they themselves are elected.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, your closing statement, please.
I'm going to go a little bit off script here and just directly challenge what Mr. Upiano said. The council does not change the charter when they put an amendment on. The council simply puts something on the ballot for the citizens to decide. I hold a deep passion for fairness and democracy, and what's disturbed me most about Propositions 1, why I took such an active role to campaign against it, is the plan to lock it in with 2 and 3, to forever strip our citizens of their right to petition their council to submit a different ballot amendment to future voters. Imagine if the US Constitution had had a clause that required unanimous approval for the 27 amendments that have occurred since 1787. Slavery would still be legal. The government would still have the right to seize your property without compensation, and women would not have the right to vote. Propositions 1, 2, and 3 are a direct threat to the world we aspire to have our children inherit, and I ask you to vote against Propositions 1, 2, and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, please join me in thanking Mr. Upiano and Mr. Brown. The next amendment that we will be discussing is Proposition 7. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to excuse you yet. You still have one more to go.
Let's debate Proposition 7.
Welcome back to the podium, Mr. Upiano and Mr. Brown. They're going to be covering term limits for us, for county executive and county council members. The current term that a council member or the county executive may serve is 4 years, and then they must run for office again. In Whatcom County, there's no limit to the number of terms that they may serve in office unless they lose the re-election bid. If passed, Proposition 7 would limit the number of terms that a person could serve as a council member or as the executive to 3 consecutive terms. Then they'd have to sit out for 4 years, but could run again after that. Now, the same ground rules will apply to this part of the forum. Mr. Upiano is handling the pro side and Mr. Brown the con. And we'll be starting with your 1.5 minute opening statements. So your opening statement should answer the question, what is your most compelling argument for why voters should support or not support Proposition 7? And Mr. Upiano, because you're the pro side, you get to start. 1.5 minutes, please.
Since I am a libertarian-leaning conservative, you might think I'd be opposed to term limits, given that the people ought to be able to limit the terms of any elected official they wish, just by voting. But the people often seem content to leave their government on autopilot, and that's when some serious mischief can occur. Proposition 7, which I will be promoting in this debate, attempts to solve that problem. Council and executive positions would run for up to 3 terms or 12 years, and the Charter Review Commission believed an officer should be able to accomplish their goals in that time. Officers would have at least 1 term where they would not be preoccupied with re-election, and then they would take 1 term off to live under the regime that they helped construct, and then they'd be eligible to serve again. This lowers barriers to entry to new faces on the political landscape, and it should give more people a chance to bring new ideas to county government.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, your opening statement?
Proposition 7 asks voters to impose term limits on both council members and the county executive. These are very different positions with very different requirements. We currently don't have district-only voting, so our democracy has been very responsive to our citizens. Voters have often refused to re-elect a person after their first term. There has always been a lot of natural turnover. Whether you're a Liberal or a Conservative, your interests are best served by having dedicated, intelligent people with experience. If Proposition 7 passes, we will not have the benefit of a future Sam Crawford, a strong Conservative who spent 15 years on the council, and we would not be able to retain a future Carl Weimer, a strong Progressive whose day job puts him in regular contact with the White House. While both have very different perspectives on the issues, I've always appreciated the experience that they bring to important decisions. The county executive role is very different. It takes a full-time professional CEO to manage a $200 million budget and over 800 employees. Few qualified CEOs would consider a private sector job if they knew they would be automatically fired after 12 years, no matter how well they performed. The same will be true if we force a 12-year time limit on the county executive. Let's not forget that if Jack Lowes had not won 4 years ago, the county executive job would have gone to someone with 0 business experience and 0 management experience. Proposition 7 is a solution looking for a problem. Please vote no on Proposition 7.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Brown, could you please rebut the comments by Mr. Upiano?
So one of the things that sort of puzzled me with this is that, you know, let's throw the guys out and force them to live under the regime that they've just created. It doesn't make sense to me because as a council member, I live under the rules that I create, whether I'm in office or not. So that's the fundamental struggle I've had. I'll be perfectly frank, I don't have a really big issue about the council member side because the reality is most council members who serve in this role don't serve for very long. They serve for 1 or 2 terms. But I feel very strongly that the county executive, which is a professional role, must be allowed to, if we're lucky enough to get a good one, let's keep him for as long as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Upiano. Your rebuttal to Mr. Brown's comments.
Well, I think the chief executive of the United States has a two-term limit, and ever since FDR, and we've been able to deal pretty well with that. And I think most people would be grateful that we have those term limits, whether it was George W. Bush or Barack Obama. But one of the things that the Charter Review Commission did consider when they were creating this amendment had to do with professional requirements of the job. And originally the amendment had applied to all executive positions, including the sheriff and auditor and those kinds of things. But the actual executive position was removed originally and then reinstated later when they realized that they would be giving more power to the executive branch than the legislative branch.
Thank you. All right, our first question. What problem or problems is this proposal designed to correct, and is it a necessary fix? And we will start with you, Mr. Upiano.
Well, I believe stagnation is the primary problem that this amendment is designed to fix, and hence lowering barriers to entry for new faces on the political landscape, as I said in my opening statement, would give more people to bring new ideas and allow the incumbents to sit one out.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown?
Well, I don't agree that we've got stagnation. I've seen no evidence of stagnation due to the fact that we don't have term limits. I mean, we effectively do have term limits. They're called elections. Every 4 years, whoever is in office is subject to being returned to office or being voted out if you don't like them. The idea that, you know, this is good for the president, so it's good for the county exec, or it's the sheriff, which was the original proposal, but didn't make it through onto the ballot, is that there's a fundamental difference. In the case of the president, it's a much more interesting, much more powerful job that everybody in the country who is a citizen pretty much can apply for. In the county job, it's a very different job. The CEO of the county executive, it's an administrative position. It's not that exciting when comparison to the US presidency, and there's a very limited candidate pool that's able to even do the job properly.
Thank you. The next question. Proponents of term limits say that term limits serve as the best buffer to keep career-minded politicians from dominating a seat in perpetuity. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Brown?
Well, the longest-serving county executive in recent years was Pete Cremin, and when you look at the people who have challenged Pete Cremin, there's been very few challenges. At the end of the day, if someone wanted the job, they can step up and put their name on the ballot. We then decide which of those two people is most qualified. It's a bit hard to, I think it's just a bit hard to criticise someone, say, like Pete Cremin, for serving in the county executive's job for the years that he did, simply because no one else wanted to run against him. Now, you could have said, you have to leave, Mr. Cremin, and then you're subject to whoever else wants to put their hat in the ring. And the question is, are they competent to actually run the county? You don't want someone who doesn't know how to do the job. You don't want someone who doesn't understand risk management, finance, or managing 800 employees.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano.
Well, I think anytime you have a new candidate or somebody running for an office, they have to demonstrate their resume and their capabilities and their ability to handle the job. And I think there are structural advantages to incumbency that create hurdles for any challenger to overcome, including more name recognition and financial backing.
Okay, great. The next question. Is 3 terms a magic number, being the perfect amount of time for a legislator to serve? Why not 2 terms or 1? What's the logic behind that specific duration, and how do 3 terms ensure better representation? And Mr. Upiano, we will start with you.
Well, I believe the term limits, or the number of terms that they could serve, was calculated by, you know, if it's 2 terms, it's 8 years. 3 consecutive terms at 12 years tended to put it above the average time limit for people to serve on the council or the executive. And so they didn't really actually feel that this would even kick in until somebody was really trying to, you know, hang around longer than they might like. 16 years seemed like an awful long time. 12 years seemed like a reasonable length of time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown.
Well, I don't agree with term limits in this case, particularly as I've said, on the executive level, so I can't speak as to the rationales to why 12 years, but to come back to slightly, I want to make sure that we understand the differences between the CEO of a county and the CEO of a private sector, at least in the way they're selected. If you think of yourself as the shareholders or as the board of directors of the county government. If you're in the private sector and you're choosing a CEO for your business, you look at all the applicants, and if you don't like any of them, you start all over again. You're not required to appoint one of the people that's applied. In the electoral system, it's different. We go through the primary election, we end up with 2 candidates at the general election. One of those is going to serve, no matter what their background, experience, or lack of it is. And that's the problem. You need to have the best people possible being willing to serve.
All right, thank you. The next question. In the online voter's guide, much of the argument for this proposition hinges on the effect of term limits on partisan elections. Do the same arguments apply to Whatcom County's nonpartisan races? Why or why not? And we will start with you, Mr. Upiano. Oops, Mr. Brown, I messed up. Mr. Brown, we're going to start with you.
So I think this is equally bad policy, whether it's a partisan or a non-partisan race. I just disagree with forcing a person out of office because their use-by date is turned up. If the person is good, we should keep him. If he's not good, let's just get rid of him or her.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Upiano?
I actually don't really see any particular difference between a partisan or a nonpartisan position. I think that term limits could apply equally to both, and there wouldn't be any particular reason to think that it would be better for one or the other. I guess as a citizen, term limits may be more attractive than to an incumbent, but that's a slightly different issue.
All right, thank you. Voters can simply vote out a politician that they no longer wish to hold in office. Why is or why isn't this a sufficient form of term limit? And we will start with Mr. Upiano, please.
Well, even as I said in my opening statement, being a libertarian-leaning conservative, in principle I might oppose term limits, but it seems like the people, like I say, people seem to be content to leave their government on autopilot, and they don't. They like to keep running with whatever the status quo is, and once in a while, I think it makes sense to shake up the pot a little bit.
Okay, and Mr. Brown.
Well, you can shake up the pot a little bit, but you're rolling the dice as to what you get, and if you're doing it by forced term limits, you're guaranteeing that the person who's going to assume that job next probably has no experience in the job. And if the existing person has been performing well, I don't know why you want to get rid of them. If you're running a private business and you've got a good CEO who's performing for you, managing the risks, doing what you want, you're not going to fire him after 12 years because you just think it's time for a change.
Thank you. The next question. Many people have expressed concern about the increasing amount of campaign contributions Whatcom County candidates have received in recent years. What effect, if any, do you think this amendment would have on that? Why do you think so? And we will start with Mr. Brown.
Well, I don't think this would have any effect on that. I mean, I've heard the issue. This actually comes back to why district only was proposed. Is we need to put district only because there's too much money in the election. Well, the interesting thing that's happened in Seattle, which is running its first district only election since they enacted district only voting, is they've got more money in the electoral process now than they've had in the last 11 years because the special interests have worked out that it's easier for them to focus on pumping their money into the races that they think they can win for their particular candidates. I don't think that the term limits will have any impact, any positive impact on reducing the money in the electoral process.
Thank you. Mr. Upiano.
I actually agree with Mr. Brown's statement. I don't think this will have any effect on the amount of money that comes in. And as far as what's going on in Seattle or with respect to Proposition 1, I don't know if that's even on the discussion for this particular debate.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna call it, and I think we're gonna go with our closing statements at this point. And because you are the pro speaker, Mr. Upiano, you have 1 minute for your closing.
Okay, well, I'll just reiterate my opening statements. Council and executive positions would run for 3 terms, which would be 12 years, quite a long time, actually. And the Charter Review Commission believed that an officer should be able to accomplish their goals in that time. Officers would have at least 1 term where they would not be preoccupied with re-election. They could take 1 term off to live under the regime that they helped construct and then become eligible to serve again. It would lower the barriers to entry for new faces on the political landscape, and it would give people more of a chance to bring new ideas to our county government. And I think that just because they haven't served in that position doesn't mean they're not qualified for it. They just haven't served in that position. Please consider approval of Charter Proposition number 7 this November.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, your closing statement?
The advocates of 2 and 3 are trying to persuade us that we must never change the way they want us to elect our county council. They're also trying to now persuade us to pass Proposition 7 because they feel we must force change when it comes to who serves on the council or the county executive. Frankly, it's making my head hurt trying to understand what this small partisan group thinks is so broken within the county that apparently we desperately need to fix it by creating rigid restrictions on our democracy. If this makes no sense to you either, please vote no on Propositions 1, 2, 3 and 7, and please vote yes on Propositions 9 and 10. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, please join me in thanking Carl Lupiano and Red Brown. This time they actually are done.
You're going to change those two.
And I have a reminder from our question screeners, please send down your questions. I would like to welcome, we have Delane Clisby and Thomas Stewin coming up to the podium, and we're going to continue on with the forum. In this next section of our forum, we will be addressing Proposition 2, Proposition 3, and Proposition 10. They all address how amendments to the charter are put on the ballot. There are currently 3 ways to put a charter amendment on the ballot. The county council can do it with a supermajority vote in favor, which means 2/3 in favor. The Charter Review Commission, which is only elected once every 10 years, can propose amendments with a simple majority in favor, which is 50% plus 1. The only other way to put amendments on the ballot is by public initiative petition. To do that, the public must collect the number of registered voters' signatures equaling at least 20% of the number of votes cast in the county in the last gubernatorial election. There is another proposition about the number of signatures. You can read about that one in your handout that we gave you. If Proposition 2 passes, the council would need a 7-0 unanimous vote to overturn a charter amendment that was approved by 2/3 of the voters. If Prop 3 passes, the council would need a 7-0 unanimous vote to change the part of the charter that governs the election of council members. And if Prop 10 passes, a supermajority vote would be required of both the County Council and the Charter Review Commission to put any amendment to the county charter on the ballot. We chose to present the 3 propositions at the same time because if Proposition 10 passes, it supersedes Proposition 2 and 3. Our first speaker for this portion of the forum is Delane Clisby. Ms. Clisby is the co-author of the pro statements in the voters pamphlet for Propositions 2 and 3 and the co-author of the con statement on Proposition 10. Speaking second will be Thomas Stewin. Mr. Stewin is an attorney and served on the 2015 Charter Review Commission that put forward Propositions 2 and 3. He is here to speak against 2 and 3 and for Proposition 10. Thank you both for being here. The same ground rules will apply to this portion of the forum, and we will be starting with your 1.5-minute opening statements. Ms. Clisby, please remember that your opening statement should answer the question, what is your most compelling argument for why voters should support Propositions 2 and 3 and not Proposition 10?
Thank you. Again, my name is Delane, and I also wanted to add that I'm super good at running slow. I urge you to accept Proposition 2. This proposal is about protecting the decisions the citizens of Whatcom County have made at the ballot box. It is narrowly focused and only deals with amendments that have already been made to the charter and passed by 2/3 vote of the people. This proposal protects your voice in the county issues. I urge you to accept Proposition 3. There are 2 things the county council should not have a say in: how much they are paid and how they are elected. The citizens of Whatcom County agreed when they approved by a 60% margin the salary commission to set the elected officials' salaries. Now it is time to make it harder for the county council to have a say in how they are elected. This amendment is narrowly focused. It deals with just sections 2.12 and 2.13, and it doesn't eliminate the council from suggesting changes, but only requires a 7-0 vote. I urge you to reject Proposition 10. The freeholders were very careful to set up a means by which the citizens of Whatcom County have a chance to propose changes to our county charter. The Charter Review Commission is the citizens' voice. With a supermajority vote required, citizens' suggestions for changes have little chance of ever being submitted to voters. A simple majority vote by the Charter Review Commission is a high number. It's 8 votes compared to the 5 votes for the county council. Making that number higher will eliminate the ability of citizens to have a say in our county constitution.
Thank you. Mr. Stewin, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. I'm urging the voters to vote for Amendment 10 and to vote no against Amendments 2 and 3. And the reason to vote for Amendment 10 is because the Charter Review Commission is the most partisan body that we elect in Whatcom County. In the last election, most of the members received less than 10% of the votes cast in the county. And this means that the County Charter Review Commission has the possibility of being highly partisan and highly polarized because it takes very few voters to elect someone to the Charter Review Commission. And yet we allow presently the Charter Review Commission on a simple majority to put an amendment on the ballot. The United States Congress requires 2/3 to put an amendment to the Constitution before the states. The state legislature requires 2/3 of the state legislature to put an amendment before the voters. The Charter Review Commission should require a 2/3 majority to put an amendment before the voters. Now, as to 2 and 3, the proposal is to require an absolute unanimous 100% decision of the council to put a measure before the voters. These are not amendments enacted by the council, they are recommendations by the council. Currently, we require 72%, 5 of 7, to put a measure on the ballot. That's a supermajority, and that's sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stewin, would you like to rebut Ms. Clisby's statement, please?
Well, yes. In one respect, the salary decisions made by the council are not amendments to the Constitution. The decision to amend the election process is a decision made by the voters and only a suggestion by the council. We don't have a crystal ball to know what the decisions need to be made in the future. Sometimes amendments are passed at low turnout elections, and so the voter result might not truly represent the public, and there may be a need to make a change, and we shouldn't lock the council out by requiring a unanimous vote.
Thank you. Ms. Clisby?
Can I just say something real quick? I'm seeming to be getting a little bit of heckling from the upper levels, and I don't think that that's appropriate, and I don't like to be bullied while I'm up here.
Clisby? Audience, please remember to continue to be respectful and refrain from comments, that type of thing. Thank you, Ms. Clisby. Your rebuttal of Mr. Stewin?
The Salary Commission was put before the voters on the ballot in 2011, and it was passed by 60%. I do believe that was a change to our charter. The Charter Review Commission was not partisan. In fact, of the 8 approved propositions that they sent to the voters, 3 reached a supermajority. Of the 8 failed, 4 of those reached a supermajority. A 2/3 vote requirement in the state and in the federal, that is a 2/3 vote that's required in each house, which is a much bigger majority than the 5 votes that our county council is allowed to send something to the voters. I find it very concerning that only 5 people can make that big of a decision for the county.
Thank you. We're going to start with our questions and answer periods. You'll have 1 minute time to respond to the questions. The first question, in general, is it now too easy for the County Council to propose charter amendments to the voters by a supermajority of 5 votes out of 7? And what's the reason for your opinion? I guess you get to expand on that, Ms. Clisby.
A supermajority vote in the county council is 5 members. I think that that's not, for very important issues, I don't think that that's much, that's not very many people making the decision to send it forward. So I think that the bar needs to be set a little bit higher, but Propositions 2 and 3 are so very specific. They deal with very narrow parts of the charter. One is how the county council is elected, and the other is for amendments that have already passed, that the voters have already said by 2/3 vote that they wanted to happen to the charter. So I think in those 2 instances, definitely the county council needs to be set to a higher standard.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
This is just a matter of opinion, apparently, but 5 out of 7 is a supermajority, 72%. It requires more than 4 council members to put an amendment before the voters. And again, this is putting the amendments before the voters. The council doesn't get to decide. So are we going to restrict the council from putting amendments in front of the voters? And yet, when you look at 10, it takes a simple majority of the 15 people elected to the Charter Review Commission to put an amendment on the ballot, and that needs to be restricted. We need to have a greater consensus than a mere majority of the commission members who are elected because they're elected by district and only by a proportion of the voters who choose to vote. And if you look at the most recent election, many of the members got less than 10% of the vote that was cast in the countywide. I think 7,000 votes was all it took to elect some of the people to the Charter Review Commission. So they're not representative of the county as a whole.
Thank you. The next question. Is it currently too easy for the Charter Commission to put charter amendments on the ballot by a simple majority of 8 votes out of 15 people? Why do you hold that opinion? And Mr. Stewart, we will start with you.
I think that it's true that it's too easy for the Charter Review Commission to put amendments on the ballot. And the reason it's easy is because of the fact that they're elected by district, that we have, in my district, there were 19 people running, so the vote gets split in many, many ways, and it promotes polarization and partisanship. And this then, tied to the fact that it only takes a simple majority, allows for ideas to be proposed which really aren't reflective of changes that need to be made in our county government. And that's why it requires a supermajority at every other level when you look at the organic document, basically our county constitution.
Thank you. Ms. Clisby?
I think that 8 out of 15 for the Charter Review Commission is plenty. One reason for that is because this is a commission that is set up to specifically look at our charter every 10 years. The freeholders were very specific that every 10 years we will elect citizens to look at our charter. So this is the time that citizens can bring their issues to an elected body to have it reviewed. It is the citizen's voice. Not one proposal that was brought, well, actually, let me rephrase that. Proposition 9 was not submitted by a citizen. It was submitted by one of the Charter Review Commissioners. But propositions, most of the propositions on there, Proposition 1, I actually submitted to the Charter Review Commission. Those propositions come from the people. And so to get 8 people to agree is an amazing feat.
Thank you. So our next question. In 2005, the Charter Review Commission placed an amendment for district-only voting on the ballot. Voters approved it by a 2/3 majority. In 2008, the County Council put an amendment on the ballot to return to countywide voting. Voters approved it by just under 55%. Do those elections demonstrate that Propositions 2 and 3 are necessary, or don't they? Or don't they? What reason do you have for your opinion? And we will start with Ms. Clisby, please.
When the Charter Review Commission in 2005 put the amendment to the voters, the language was very clear. Shall provide that each member of the county council except the county council at large be elected by majority voters in their own district. When the county council, see, this is the problem that I have. When the county council puts something on the ballot, they don't just get to vote to put that on the ballot. They get a say in how that ballot is worded. And this is what they said. Each voter may vote for each council office from each district. What is a council office? I mean, I'm totally confused even now. They're council members. What council office were we voting on?
Mr. Stewart?
I think the 2005 and 2008 process illustrates the need to allow the council to put an issue back on the ballot when they believe that the public has been misled or the result of the decision wasn't what was anticipated when the amendment was placed to the public. And the voters in 2008 said, agreed that they were unhappy with the district-only voting plan. And amendments 2 and 3 are designed to prevent that kind of clarification. This is an example of, first off, making things more complicated because one side is unhappy with the decision-making process. That's why our statute books are so huge. But also, it's a question of beware what you wish for, because who knows what will happen with the elections to the council in the future. If amendment whichever one it is now that's going to put 5 districts gets passed, then will the council be able to go back to the voters if that turns out to be a problem? Maybe not.
Thank you. Proposition 10, which the county council proposed, would require the Charter Commission to adopt ballot proposals by the same supermajority already required for the council to do so, 2/3 of each body. Would this be an improvement in the charter amendment process or solve a problem with it? Mr. Stewart, we'll start with you.
I think Amendment 10 would be an improvement because it would require the development of a consensus more than a majority, so that the issues that go before the voters have something less likely to be partisan in motivation in terms of changing our organic document. Constitutions and the Charter, which is our Constitution, shouldn't be changed every time there is a political wind blowing.
Thank you. Ms. Clisby?
I think it's interesting that the Charter Review Commission actually failed Proposition 9 by a supermajority vote. But the county council didn't like that supermajority vote, and so they put it back on the ballot. There were many other decisions made in the Charter Review Commissions that did have a supermajority vote. The nonprofit amendment failed by a supermajority vote, huge supermajority vote. So I think that to categorize the Charter Review Commission as just barely passing things in this charter review process is kind of a misnomer. And Proposition 9 is a very good example of that. That failed by 11-4, and now it's back on the ballot by the county council.
Thank you. Next question. Proposition 10 would also nullify Propositions 2 and 3 if the voters approve one or both of them. Would voters who approve them be denied their voice in how the charter amendment should be proposed? Why do you agree or disagree? I will start with Ms. Clisby, please.
Can you repeat that?
I sure can. Proposition 10 would also nullify Propositions 2 and 3. It supersedes it. At least that's what it says on the ballot measure. If the voters approve one or both of them, would voters who approve them be denied their voice in how the charter amendment should be proposed? Why do you agree or disagree?
For one thing, I don't think that the final ballot language still has that Proposition 10 would supersede Proposition 2 and 3, but it is an incompatible vote. I know that was one of the first amendments that came out, but it changed several times, and I was on the committees that wrote statements, and I had to actually ask for more time because it changed at the last minute. I think that Proposition 10 takes away your voice in county government. The Charter Review Commission is your one time every 10 years that you can go to an elected body and talk about the charter.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stewart.
I think that Ms. Clisby is right in the sense that Amendment 10, if it passed, and if Amendments 2 and 3 passed, 2 and 3 would be effective because they're all on the same ballot for the same election. If 10 was in effect when this Charter Review Commission functioned, Amendments 1, 2, and 3 would not be on the ballot. They would not have gotten 10 votes. There would not be a consensus because they're, in my view, a partisan position designed to shift the control of the county council.
All right, thank you. And just a point of clarification, on our online voter guide, it does currently say that if 2, 3, and 10 passes, 10 would supersede 2 and 3. Our next question. What evidence can you offer that demonstrates that any of these 3 propositions will meet a legal test or result in better governance? I will start with you, Mr. Stewart.
Well, I think that Amendment 10 would result in better governance. We would have a more thoughtful debate in the Charter Review Commission. Amendments 2 and 3 serve no useful purpose, in my opinion.
All right, thank you, Ms. Clisby.
Amendments 2 and 3 serve the purpose of protecting the voice of the citizens. Amendment 2, Proposition 2, only deals with amendments that have already happened to the charter and passed by 68%. Proposition 1 is a very good example of that. When district voting passed in 2005, the council put it back on the ballot. It passed with a 68% margin. Why is the council revisiting that when the citizens very clearly spoke? Propositions 2 and 3 protect your voice. Proposition 10 limits your voice because you are not going to be able to go to the Charter Review Commission and expect any kind of reasonable changes to come out of that.
Thank you. What would be the practical effect of requiring a unanimous vote for the council to place a charter amendment on the ballot? Is this a reasonable requirement? Why do you think it is or isn't? And Ms. Clisby?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. What would be the practical effect of requiring a unanimous vote for the council to place a charter amendment on the ballot? Is this a reasonable requirement? Why do you think it is or isn't?
Actually, I think it's pretty reasonable. Our current charter, or our current county council, votes 7-0 on a lot of things. It's constant that they vote 7-0. So I don't think that that sets the bar really too high. I think it offers a lot of protection to the citizens who have spoken. And really, the county council should not be making decisions with how they are elected. It just shouldn't be happening. That's like, you know, the fox in the hen house.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, please.
Well, the Amendment 3 and 2, which require unanimous votes, simply make it much, much harder to act. And that's why there are very few restrictions on governing bodies that require a unanimous vote. The argument that many decisions are made by unanimous vote, in fact, is an argument that the amendment is likely not required. That is, there is the possibility of getting a unanimous vote under certain circumstances. But the real problem behind this is, do the voters get to decide if they've made a mistake in the past or not? And by making it unanimous, they make it much harder to put that issue back in front of the voters. Thank you.
Should the provision allowing county council to put propositions on the ballot be removed from the charter? And we'll start with you, Mr. Stewin.
The county council, in my opinion, is the best qualified group to see if there are problems in the way that the county charter is working. I think they are better situated in their knowledge of how the county operates than the Charter Review Commission, and they are motivated to represent, currently at least, the whole of the county toward its best interests. The Charter Review Commission, as I pointed out, is elected in a way that's highly polarized and partisan and doesn't have those interests.
Thank you. Ms. Clisby?
I actually don't think that the county council should be removed from making all decisions on forwarding amendments of our county charter. And it's being presented that Propositions 2 and 3 do just that, and they don't. They're very narrowly focused. What I would say is that our freeholders set up a specific time to look at our charter and to review it every 10 years. This is our county constitution. We do not want to just be making willy-nilly changes to our governing document that produces, a government that doesn't operate well if it's just changed this year and changed that year and, oh, let's change it again. So no, I think that the county council should be able to change it, but there should be some very good thought put into that and not through backroom deals.
Okay, it's looking like we have enough time for one more question. What interests are supporting or opposing Propositions 2 and 3, and as I'm going to ad lib a little bit, and also Proposition 10, and what do they hope to achieve by it? And I will give that one to you, Ms. Clisby, first.
Who is supporting them? Mm-hmm. I am supporting Propositions 2 and 3, and I'm against Proposition 10. I am a conservative. I'm not paid. I don't get any donations to do this. I was at every Charter Review Commission but 2 when I was sick. I ran for the Charter Review Commission. I've taken interest in this process. The words, there's a lot of name calling that's been bandied about, and I would say I'm not either of those names. I am just your average citizen that happened to step up this time and to look at these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Stewin.
I believe that there's a partisan purpose behind Amendment 1. It was proposed almost immediately when the Charter Review Commission was formed, even before testimony was taken for weeks and months after that. It was proposed and passed right at the start by in a sense, well, it was the 9 votes of the 9 people who in various ways are identified in my mind as conservatives. What their agenda is, no one actually told me. All I know is from the hearsay, but I see this as an attempt, an interest in perhaps shifting control of the county council for some purposes, and whether that's a coal interest or not, I don't know.
Thank you, and we're going to move along to our closing statements. We will be starting with Ms. Clisby.
In closing, I just want to reiterate that I was the citizen who brought the Proposition 1 proposal to the Charter Review Commission on the very first night. It came from a citizen. I included in that proposal something of the wording for Proposition 3 also. I don't have representation on our current county council. That's just the bottom line. I would like to change that. I do vote. I don't expect to have a representative anyway. When citizens vote, they want to know that their legislators will abide by their vote. Proposition 2 gives citizens this assurance. The county council should not have a say in how they are elected. Proposition 3 helps assure they will not. Both of these amendments are important because they protect the citizen's voice. I urge you to accept both of them. The consequence of Proposition 10 is that voters will lose their voice on charter issues. Protect your voice.
Sorry. Mr. Stewin, your closing statement, please.
Amendment 10 should be adopted. It proposes a two-thirds majority vote requirement on the Charter Review Commission. In our early meetings this year, that requirement was proposed by a group of the members that I was part of and was turned down by the rest of the commissioners. And I recall a couple of them specifically saying that the minority should not control the majority. And while that may be true of the Charter Review Commission in this year's composition, it also reflects on the county as a whole. And the amendments that are being proposed to the county charter should not be designed to create minority control. And that's why I think that 10 needs to be adopted and 2 and 3 rejected.
Thank you. And audience, please join me in thanking Delane Clisby and Thomas Stewin for helping us understand Propositions 2, 3, and 10. Proposition 9 is the last proposed amendment that we will be covering today, and it proposes redistricting our county. I'd like to welcome to the podium Tim Douglas and Samuel Sefcik. Currently, the county is divided into 3 districts of equal population with 2 council positions in each district. There is 1 at-large council position, which is nominated without regard to district residents, resulting in a total of 7 council positions. Proposition 9 was proposed by the Whatcom County Council. If passed, it creates 5 districts of equal population with 1 council position in each one. In addition, there would be 2 at-large positions that would be nominated without regard to district. This provides the continuance of 7 council positions for Whatcom County. You may wish to refer to your handout once again during this discussion. A map of our current districts, as well as an illustration of the approximate regions of the proposed 5 districts is included. Do keep in mind that a redistricting committee would draft the actual districts if this measure were to be passed. And for our audience at home, the handout is available at www.lwvbellinghamwhatcom.org. Speaking for Proposition 9 is former Mayor of Bellingham and current Chair of Fair and Equal Whatcom, Tim Douglas. Samuel Sefcik will be speaking against the proposition. Mr. Sefcik is an activist, a student, and an entrepreneur. Thank you both for being here today. The same ground rules apply for this portion of the forum, and we will be starting with your 1.5-minute opening statements. Speakers, please do remember that your opening statement should answer the question, what is your most compelling argument for why voters should support or not support Proposition 1? Mr. Douglas, since you are the pro side. Oh, I'm sorry, did I misspeak? Proposition 9. I did. I apologize. Mr. Douglas, since you are the pro side, we will be starting with you.
Whatcom County Council will be facing a lot of tough issues in the coming years. How can we be sure that everyone will be fairly, and equally represented as these are considered? Proposition 9 gives us a clear choice and a clear answer on that matter. Right now, as has been pointed out before, the division of Bellingham creates 3 different parts of county districts. As a result, there's a feeling amongst many rural voters that they have to unfairly compete with Bellingham every time there's a county council election. Bellingham, likewise, because they're sharing districts with various parts of the county, also can't be guaranteed that they are going to have a presence on the council. Yet all of these different points of view are very important to be considered when we tackle important issues. Proposition 9 proposes 5 fair and equal districts. These would be 1 on the coastal portion of the county, from Blaine down through Ferndale and Lummi. There'd be a central farmlands district with the small towns and farming areas there, and then a area for the foothills and Lake Samish and Lake Whatcom. Bellingham would have 2 districts, and there would be elected 2 at-large representatives who could live anywhere in the county. As a result, we'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Sufsick. Your opening statement, please.
All right. Thank you for the League of Women Voters, first of all, for putting this on. I hope that the voters can gain a lot of valuable information from what's been said here. And anyway, so my position on Proposition 9, first of all, is that we should really be looking at what we're actually voting for. Anytime we're passing a policy, it needs to have specifics. And that's the problem with Proposition 9. It's poorly planned and it's poorly timed. You see, we have a rough line, if you look at the handout, of what those districts are supposed to be. That's been drawn up by, somebody. We don't really know who. And the fact is, right now, it actually destroys our existing public utility districts and our port district because they use the 3-district system. There have been no specifics presented as to how we're going to go about that, how to fix those, whether we're going to move those to a 5-district system or keep our existing framework. Additionally, this just isn't the time to do this. Regardless of whether you think that we should vote for 5 districts or not, right now it's ill-timed because it's based on outdated census information. We'd be doing the redistricting next year, early next year, and we'd be using data from 2010. The most prudent thing to do would be to wait till 2020 and the next census result comes out, and we can draw better lines that more accurately reflect the populations. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Sefcik, could you please give your rebuttal to Mr. Douglas's comments?
Yeah, certainly. It was a generic opening, sort of like mine, but the fact is that I think that this is really more than what's quote-unquote good for the voters. We keep hearing the words fair and equal thrown around, and who wants to vote against something that's fair and equal? Of course, it's been framed that way. But the fact is, it's designed to make, I think, the electoral system easier to the incumbents who are there. It's kind of interesting, and the white elephant in the room is why on earth are we arguing about keeping district or county-wide voting, but also changing the number of districts? In an at-large system, it shouldn't matter how many districts we have. So what I take that to really mean is that whoever is drafting these proposals is trying to hedge their bets in the event that district-only voting is passed, and we do end up going back to that system. So I really think that voters need to be paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes here, and that's really what we're going to be looking at today.
Thank you. Mr. Douglas, your comments to Mr. Sefcik's opening statement.
We do not currently have a really fair and equal system. Rural voters have to compete with Bellingham voters, and they shouldn't have to. That's not fair. Bellingham voters aren't sure that they're going to have representation on a long-term basis on the council either, and that's not fair. The proposal for 5 fair and equal districts will make sure that voices from all over the county, the many perspectives of a diverse county, which has double the population that we had 40 years ago when we adopted our charter, that these many voices will be heard and brought to bear on the decisions that we have to make.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to start our question period, and you will have 1 minute time to answer each question. The first question, is there a problem this amendment is designed to remedy? Why do you think it does or it doesn't? And we will start with Mr. Douglas, please.
Certainly there is a problem, and I've mentioned it already, but the math requires if we're going to have equal districts, they have to be of equal population by the Constitution, then that math requires that Bellingham be divided up into some portion of each of the 3 districts. So that divides a community of common interest, and that also is not consistent with the Constitution. As a result, something has to be changed so that rural voters have their fair voice and urban voters have their fair voice when matters come before the council.
Thank you. Mr. Sefcik, your response?
Yeah. So in counter to that, I really believe that our system is fair, and here's why. Right now, it is divided based on population. And second, even if we were to redraw those lines, we'd be still basing it on 2010 numbers, which are outdated at this point. So that's, first of all, this isn't the time to do it. Second, it's really hard to define what a quote-unquote community of interest is. Right now we have 3 districts. I think that works pretty well, except for the fact that the district-only system forces 2 of those districts, districts 2 and 3, to have their voice mitigated. So that said, we don't really know what a community of interest is. First of all, I've heard the number tossed around, 34 different communities of interest in Whatcom County. Does that mean we should have 34 districts? I don't think so. Really, the fact is there are 2 main communities of interest. That's rural residents, and then there are the more urban residents. And I think that just going back to the district-only system would be all we need to make sure that the system is fair for both of those communities of interest.
Thank you. Next question. Proponents of this measure use a map to show how 5 districts might look, 2 for Bellingham and 3 in an arc around the city. There would also be 2 at-large representatives. Would this achieve fairer representation for all Whatcom County citizens? Why or why not? Let's start with Mr. Sefcik, please.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to go ahead and let Mr. Douglas answer this question first. I'd like to give them that privilege.
Actually, because of the rules of the forum, I got a call on you first.
Well, I can answer it then too. Yeah, so if you take a look at the handout, one of the interesting things that's been said is, proponents of Proposition 9 say that our current 3-district system is gerrymandered. And if you look at it, they're actually pretty clean blocks. The only little thing you see is up there in Linden, where they made sure in the last redistricting that Linden could fit in, that the city limits of Linden would all be in the same district, which I think was fair. But if you look at the proposed proposition, you end up with all these jagged lines all over the place. And really, I think that that's a lot more gerrymandered than what we have with our existing system. Would this be fair to Whatcom County residents? Well, the fact is we don't know, and that's what's scary about it, is we don't know what the actual lines will look like. Just keep in mind that this is a proposition. This is not final. The redistricting committee would have to decide what that is, and they haven't been appointed, and we don't know what they've come up with. And we do know that if this is passed, what they would come up with would be based on 2010 numbers, which are completely outdated at this point. So I don't think it's fair, no.
All right, thank you. Mr. Douglas?
Well, it's certainly clear that the city of Bellingham is a community of interest. It's 40% of the total population of the county. And to have it divided into 3 parts and have the county rural areas having to share portions of that with Bellingham, and having Bellingham having to share portions of its interest with areas outside that have a different lifestyle and understandably a different set of values, is not a fair solution. That's why I think we need to go to 5 districts so that everybody will have a voice representing their interests.
Thank you. An independent, bipartisan districting commission actually determines the district boundaries. What guarantee would supporters of 5 districts have that the commission would approve similar boundaries? Similar to the map that you've derived. If you would please continue with that thought, Mr. Douglas.
Well, clearly this ballot measure provides guidance, but not final boundaries, because that is the responsibility of the districting committee to draw the final boundaries. However, it's clear that we are addressing areas of broad interest within the county: the coastal area, the farmlands, the lakes and foothills, and then the city of Bellingham. I don't think they will find any impossibility at all of drawing districts that reflect those, and I'm confident they'll do so.
Thank you. Mr. Sefcik.
Yeah. Again, we don't know. And another issue actually is the legality of this proposal. What's interesting is that in the amendment, Proposition 9, the actual language of the charter that calls for a redistricting committee every 10 years is not changed. So we would in effect have to violate our existing county charter to convene a districting committee in 2016. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why not wait just another 4 years? If the council has the right to put this on the ballot, let them do that again in 4 years when we first of all have updated census information, and second, when we don't run the risk of spending county taxpayer money in court trying to figure out whether this is legal or not in the first place.
Thank you. Question number 4. If approved by voters, ballot Proposition 1 would change from the current countywide voting for council members to voting by district. Would 5 districts achieve the stated goal of fairer representation if voters also approve district-only voting? Please explain your view. And we will start with Mr. Sefcik, please.
All right, could you actually repeat the question?
Sure. If approved by voters, ballot Proposition 1 would change from the current countywide voting for council members to voting by district. Would 5 districts achieve the stated goal of fairer representation if voters also approved district-only voting? So if they vote yes on both
Right.
Prop 1 and 1.
So that's an interesting question. I think it actually goes back to what I said earlier, and that's I really think that based on how this was done, Proposition 5 was designed to in effect hedge the losses of that could potentially come from Proposition 1 for the incumbency. You have a system where, just based on these lines, I don't think it's unreasonable for the progressive majority to gain a good 4 seats on the council really easily in any given election. So that's assuming that it was district-only voting. I think that it was designed to make sure that if we went back to that 5-district system, if we went back to that district-only system, you would have safe seats for at least 4 progressive members on the council.
Thank you. Mr. Douglas, please.
This proposal was designed by citizens. 2,100 citizens signed petitions and brought them to the council and testified for hours before the council even decided to place it on the ballot. So it was not designed to protect incumbents. It is an interest on the part of our citizens in this county to have fair and equal representation so that both rural and small town interests, as well as urban interests, as in Bellingham, are reflected as we tackle the tough issues that we do.
Well, that kind of segues into this next question. At the Charter Review Commission, many citizens asked to have rural districts that are not shared with Bellingham voters. Does Proposition 9 accomplish that? And Mr. Douglas, if you would.
Does it accomplish not sharing?
I'll just read the whole thing
All right,
over again.
thank you.
At the Charter Review Commission, many citizens asked to have rural districts that are not shared with Bellingham voters. Does Proposition 9 accomplish that?
It does. We'll definitely have rural-only precincts as well as city-only precincts. This will assure that all voices are present when the important decisions are made at the council. I should also point out very quickly that that the Charter Review Commission actually did not consider a matter that separated district-only voting from the question of 5 districts. That's one reason why you saw the lopsided vote, because there were members of the Charter Review Commission that simply did not want to include district-only voting automatically in the 5 district.
Thank you. Mr. Sefcik, please.
Yeah, so I think, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that we don't know what we're voting for. You know, this is a nice-looking map, you know, some good colors on there. I like it. It looks nice. You know, somebody obviously put a lot of work into designing it. But we don't know that we're getting that. In fact, there's nothing legally binding about that map whatsoever. That's all decided by the Districting Commission and what they decide based on our 2010 numbers. There have been significant, you know, potentially population movements within Whatcom County. We know that small cities have grown a lot. We don't know what we're getting. You know, this could look entirely different. Additionally, if you look at District 3, at least the way that this is drawn, you have Maple Falls, a lot of the eastern Whatcom County, sharing a lot of Bellingham, actually, with the Lakes District, the Geneva neighborhood, et cetera, as well as Chuckanut in southern Bellingham. So you really have, you know, even this map isn't ideal simply because it includes rural residents and lumps them in with a lot of urban residents in southern Bellingham.
Thank you. The census publishes updated data every year, as does our state government. Wouldn't or couldn't the districting committee just use this data? Mr. Sefcik, we'll start with you.
Could we use our data from 2010? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh, sorry.
It says that the census actually publishes updated data. I think they do projected data every year, and our state government also does as well. Could the districting committee just use the updated data?
Certainly, we could use any data we wanted to. The question is whether it would be accurate. You know, there's a reason that we'd redraw the districts right after the census. That's why we did it in 2011 after the 2010 census. That's why we're supposed to do it in 2021 after the 2020 census. So we could, yes, certainly, but projected numbers are not the same thing as real numbers. Any expert, any mathematician, demographic expert can get up and say, we think that the numbers will look like this, but that doesn't include a lot of variables that do influence population. That's why we take a real census and don't just do projected numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Douglas?
We can certainly use those updated census numbers, and that's what the districting committee would be doing. There would be other considerations as well. We do look at the various districts within for special purposes. But by and large, we'll end up with these 5 districts, with 5 districts that are very similar in population. And that certainly is consistent with the requirements of the Constitution.
Thank you. The next question, if 5 districts result in fairer representation for all county citizens, is there a need for at-large positions? Why or why not? And we will start with you, Mr. Douglas.
I think there is a need, and that's been addressed in earlier comments tonight. We all pay taxes to the county. We all rely on county services. The criminal justice system, very important to all of us. As a result, we have a lot of interest, no matter where we live in Whatcom County, in the bigger picture questions that are faced by the county. As a result, having 2 at-large representatives assures that people will not be, under any circumstances, just limited to voting for people from their district only, but instead will have an opportunity to have at least some additional representation on the council.
Thank you. Mr. Sefcik?
Sefcik, yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the at-large seats is that I like the idea of the at-large seats, or a seat right now as we have it, but it really only makes any sense in the context of district-only voting. The only difference is that if we have an at-large system, you can run in the primary, even if you're not from a specific district, because it's at-large. But right now, in effect, all of our seats are at-large. I like the idea of it, but right now it doesn't make any sense to add or take away at-large seats simply because we don't have district-only voting. I think that if we did do district-only voting, we should retain, of course, the 3 districts with 1 at-large seat and 2 seats per district. I think that's a fair system.
Thank you. Next question. There's been a good deal of speculation about which political viewpoint would win or lose majority control of the county council, depending on which ballot issues succeed in this election. Is calculating winners and losers a compelling reason to amend the basic governing document of the county? We will start with you, Mr. Sefcik.
I don't think it is. I think that it's not about us, it's not about me, it's not about Tim, it's not about one party or another party. It's about what provides the best representation. And even though, it's been said, 5 districts, we need more districts, our old system is outdated, there really is no compelling data to prove that it's outdated. Right now, in order to get fair representation, what we need to do is stick with the current system and simply move back to the district-only voting. That's the best way to get fair representation, ensure that communities of interest can elect their own leaders. Honestly, even if people were calculating, what they're going to do in the future and who's going to win, I don't think it's unreasonable for the county council to swing from one side to another any given election with a district-only system, because you have a large population base in Bellingham that moves slightly into the districts 2 and district 3. I think that as long as people do their job, pay attention to the voice of the citizens, it will work if we have a district-only system and stick with our current three district plan.
Mr. Douglas.
What we're looking for is fair and equal representation. We hear complaints now from people in the county who feel like they have to share with the city of Bellingham in every election and compete in every election. The people of Bellingham also are not guaranteed that they'll have representation, and things can move back and forth according to the quality of candidates, the issues at hand, and the quality of the elections that are conducted. I don't think there's a guarantee one way or the other in terms of a particular party's advantage in this. I think the issue is, what is the advantage for the people of Whatcom County to get good decisions so that we can get on with our lives and resolve the challenges that face us?
Thank you. The next question, would dividing into 5 districts rather than 3 make the council more or less accountable to all the citizens of Whatcom County? And Mr. Douglas, that one's for you.
Well, again, I think that does depend a bit on the outcome of Proposition 1 and whether or not we go to district-only voting or not. I personally don't favor district-only voting because I think we all have something at stake and we all should have an opportunity to vote on those who will represent us on the council, and that's all 7 members. So I think there's no guarantee one way or the other on this. I simply think that we should have an open opportunity to be actively involved as citizens and voters.
Thank you. And Mr. Sefcik?
I think one of the most telling things about this proposal is, as Delane actually mentioned earlier, it failed the Charter Review Commission by an 11-4 supermajority. And keep in mind that that was a bipartisan supermajority, all right? People transcended party lines on the Charter Review Commission in order to strike this down. Yet it came back up in the county council and was passed with 6 out of 7 votes. So, you know, Tim talks about fair and equal representation, making sure that rural residents are represented. That's absolutely true, except that the interesting thing is that the people who put this on the ballot on the county council are seen as those county residents as not representing them. You know, those 6 out of 7 members that voted for this, generally speaking, the county residents aren't in favor of those people, and that's why they feel locked out of the process. So the fact that 6 out of 7 of them voted for something like this doesn't really bode well, I think, for making sure that it's fair and equal for county and rural residents.
Thank you. Next question. In your view, was it appropriate for the council to place this proposal before the voters after it had failed to be adopted by the Review Commission on a 11-4 vote? Why or why not? And Mr. Sefcik, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I knew it would come up at some point. I don't think it was appropriate, and here's why. This is why we have a Charter Review Commission. If the county council can simply, you know, push aside the recommendations of the Charter Review Council or put their own on the ballot, then there's no point in having a charter review every 10 years. Second, the legality is in question. And one of the things Mr. Douglas will probably talk about is that there was a lawsuit regarding this, and it was, quote unquote, thrown out by the judge. The reasoning, however, given by that judge was that they didn't want to interfere in the election process until it was already decided. Then the legality would be discussed. Yes, they did throw out the lawsuit, but it was simply so that voters could look at it on the ballot and decide for themselves. And then the court would discuss whether or not this was okay to do in the first place. So again, the legality is in question, and I fully expect more lawsuits to come up after this passes, if it does pass, in which case we would just be spending more county money, more taxpayer money, on trying to determine whether this is legal or not. And I don't think that's a wise use of our funds.
Mr. Douglas?
Spending more county taxpayer money so that we can make sure that people have a choice on the ballot is a strange kind of conclusion. I really think that it's clear when the Charter Review Commission was meeting, that vote that has been referred to several times here of 10-4, that was on a charter only or district only voting combined with 5 districts. The Charter Review Commission never really had an opportunity to divide those 2 issues, and that's why a number of them voted that down. I think the council had not only a right, but an obligation, frankly, to put on the ballot an opportunity for people in this county to decide whether they want to continue with the current outdated 3-district system, or if they want a fairer, more representative 5-district system where rural voters and urban voters both have their points of view represented.
Thank you. And this will be our last question. If creating more districts is a way to more fairly represent communities that have different interests and political leanings, why stop at 5? We will start with you, Mr. Douglas.
I suppose there's unlimited number of districts that we could pursue, but the fact is there aren't, despite the diversity of our county, there are not that many strongly varied positions that we would need to have that number of districts. The point is, over 40 years, we've been operating in just 3 districts. 3 districts that now chop Bellingham up into parts and require that county voters compete with Bellingham voters, and Bellingham voters may or may not have representation on the county council. I think it's time to make that change.
Thank you. And Mr. Sefcik, please.
Yeah, that's another good question. I think that, again, it speaks to it's a testament to the success of our current system. There aren't that many communities of interest. There are, there's rural interest usually, and there are urban interests. That's pretty much what we have. Even though we've heard that 34 number thrown around, I don't know what all those community interests are, or what all those different communities of interest are. As Tim said, I agree, there are probably only a couple, and that's why we only have 3 districts. I think going to 5 just further divides us. It puts us into little boxes, and I think it really shuts out productive dialogue that needs to be happening. Certainly, yes, Bellingham voters share a little bit of space with the county voters, and vice versa. I think it's a good thing to have some of that, though. Why? Because it forces us to come together, find common ground, and discuss what works for both sides.
Thank you. And now we're going to have our closing statements, and we start with the pro side. So, Mr. Douglas.
We've heard a lot of discussion about whether or not things are fair and representative and equal now in Whatcom County. With the tough issues ahead, it's clear we've got to take a very careful look at that. And a system that is 40 years old, that was born with a sort of our own constitution, but in reaction to a good old boys sort of system of the county commissioners, that is gone. It's time to look fresh at how better to represent the rural interests and the urban interests and make sure that all of them are at the table. Because we've done some great things in Whatcom County over the years when we get our heads together and don't practice Washington, D.C. type politics, but what we can accomplish locally. Let's do it.
Thank you. Mr. Sefcik, your closing statement.
It's interesting that Mr. Douglas talks about Washington, D.C. style politics, because I'd like to take a quote that was actually obtained in a public records request from one of the council, the Charter Review commissioners, Todd Donovan, one of the liberals who's actually a proponent of this. He said, quote, "Aside from my thinking, a 5-2 system is a decent compromise. I also think it will really complicate the Republicans' efforts to sell this and increase the odds of people voting no on the lot," unquote, referring to the other Charter Review amendments. You want to know why people are so disillusioned with our political process? You want to know why people of my generation don't want to get involved? It's that. It's DC-style politics, just like Tim Douglas was mentioning. Instead of saying, how can we work together, it's how can we throw a wrench in the cogs of the other side. He's talked about fair and equal. It's been framed as a good thing. But this is what's happened behind closed doors. That's what people are saying. You know what? This is designed to complicate the efforts. Do we want that? Absolutely not. That's the brainchild of dysfunction. That's what happens in D.C. And I think that the more we can avoid that, the better off we are. That's why I'm encouraging voters to vote no on Proposition 9 and yes on Proposition 1.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking Tim Douglas and Samuel Sefcik for being here this morning and helping us better understand Proposition 9. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham, Whatcom County, I'd like to extend a big thank you to the City of Bellingham, our co-sponsor, and to our media partner, the Bellingham Herald. Repeats of this and all of our forums may be viewed on BTV 10, which is Comcast Channel 10. They may also be watched on demand via the City of Bellingham's YouTube channel. Simply go to youtube.com and then search City of Bellingham. I remind you that the forums are the property of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham and may not be used in any manner without specific written permission from both parties. It has been an honor this year to serve as the League's Voter Services Chair, and I'd like to ask all of you to join me in thanking my marvelous forum committee, without which our election forums would not be possible. Thank you, guys. And thank you for being such an attentive audience and for asking such great questions. Your vote counts, so remember to cast it by November 3rd and encourage your family, friends, and neighbors to vote also. Have a great day.